Hello everyone and welcome to episode 24 of The Racer's Edge. In the middle of the August break, in Formula One terms, nobody's working, they're all on holiday, sunning themselves. Well, we're not, we're here. And one of the reasons we're here is because I'm delighted to have in the studio a guest I've been trying to get on the show for several years now. Wonderful raconteur, very good friend, and a brilliant Formula One racing brain. Before I introduce him, I'd just like to remind everybody that September 2, 2013 is going to be a red letter day for all of us that love motor racing, because that is 50 years since Bruce McLaren Motor Racing Limited was originally registered at Companies House here in the United Kingdom. So on the back of that, September 2, we're all going to be looking forward to the celebrations McLaren down in Woking will be conducting around that 50th anniversary. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Alastair Caldwell, one of the original guys at McLaren. Not there in '63, Alastair, but you were there when Bruce effectively started his Formula One career with his own car. But before we get on to that, tell me about the early days in New Zealand, because your brother, Bill, was a race driver, and I presume that had an influence on the way you grew up and what you breathed and thought about.
Oh yes, I was brought up in a fantastic car atmosphere. I mean, if you've ever seen American Graffiti, New Zealand was like that, where you were totally obsessed by cars. We talked about cars, dreamed about cars. You could get your license at 15, so the day you were 15, you were down there with your license and off you went. You could drive when you were 12, as long as you were the licensed driver. So I drove my mother around from the time I was 12 till I was 15 and I got my license. And we were totally obsessed by
What cars are we in at this point?
Vauxhalls nearly always. My father had a government job and he had a government Vauxhall, so it would be a Vauxhall Wyvern, and then it was a Velux, 6-cylinder Velux, which was
nice.
New. And new cars in New Zealand were very rare because you couldn't import cars. Everybody drove old cars because you just physically couldn't import them. They had a balance of payments problems, and unlike us, instead of just printing money, they just said you can't buy anything. That was their fix, and it worked. You weren't allowed to buy anything from overseas unless you had overseas funds, and my father had some overseas funds because my mother was English, my father was Scots, so we were able to buy this late model Vauxhall, and you were king of the world with this thing. It was like having a Porsche Panamera, what it was called.
How is that pronounced? It's such a weird name, isn't it?
Give it up. Cars are horrible. Anyway, so and I went to a high school where everybody was obsessed by cars, and one boy's father, Howden Ganley, who became a Grand Prix driver, took the Autosport, and we used to get this and read it. And in fact, I don't kind of catalogue them, but of my one class at high school, we had a Formula 2 driver in Europe, the manager of Brabham's, the manager of Winkelmann's, me, a Grand Prix driver, New Zealand Gold Star champion Jimmy Palmer, and so on. Wow. All from this one class of 32 boys at high school. And we all talked about going to Europe, and in the end we did. But I started off working as an apprentice mechanic and working on people's racing cars in the weekends, because in New Zealand there were no full-time race mechanics. It was something you did in the summertime maybe for quite a while, but normally it was just something you did on your holidays. And my elder brother Bill, he wanted to be a racing driver, so he saved up, made some money, and bought himself an Austin Healey, raced that, and then he bought himself a Lola, a little Mark 1 Lola, which I still own. I managed to buy back after 40 years. I had the actual car that he raced and I worked on when he was 22.
Is that here or in New Zealand?
It's in England. Oh, wow. Yeah, I bought it back, and it's been rebuilt in England, and it's sitting in my garage. It's road registered. It's got, I could have driven it here today, but I've got lights and indicators on it and so on. And one day I'll do a rally with it, because racing doesn't appeal to me much. Anyways, yes, so my brother sadly was killed in a racing car in '66 at Tauratonga in New Zealand, the last race of the Tasman Series before it moved over to Australia. And
what happened that day?
Sadly, it was a Brabham with a twin cam, a little Brabham single-seater with a twin cam, and the throttle spring, which was a tension spring like most people had, broke. The little tit on the end of the spring broke off, and when it fell down on the manifold, it fell down perfectly across the bar between the carburetors and became a solid rod. And in fact, it was still there after the accident. The throttles were still wide open, and it was a horrific accident because when the throttle sticks open, the only thing a driver can actually do is push the clutch. And we used to try and train our Formula One drivers to do this, because that's the only thing that's quick enough. Turning the switches off is too slow. The only thing that works is push the clutch. And of course, in a modern car, that saves the engine anyway, because it hits the limiter. In those days, it just went bang, but it didn't matter. Anyway, he didn't push the clutch. He tried to stop the car, shot across a grass infield, hit a bank, flew in the air, hit a truck that was being used as a grandstand, and sadly killed 2 children as well as himself. And so that was the end of that.
And Alastair, I've got to ask, what sort of impact did that have on you and the sport that you had obviously started to love? Can you remember how you felt in the aftermath?
Well, obviously I was devastated by the loss of my brother, and I stopped racing. I didn't go racing and just went back to work. And after a few months, his legacy came through. We sold the old racing car, and he had some insurance, which was from a Canadian insurance company that would insure anybody, whatever they did. They used to come around to the garages and sell it in New Zealand. And I persuaded him to take some out. I think it was 2 and 6 per £1,000 or something, and per month. And they would insure helicopter pilots and top dressing pilots who had a very limited lifespan. And so he had this insurance. So I got this little bit of money. I think it was £800, in fact, which was a lot of money actually in 1967. Enough to put down a deposit on a house and so on. And my wife thought that's what we were going to do. And we were sponsored by Shell, and Shell had a scheme where you could start a garage and they would finance you, because you weren't allowed to open a gas station unless there was a garage. You couldn't have a petrol station unless it went with a garage. You couldn't just decide to put one on the side of the road. So they used to open garages, and then they would put the petrol station in the garage. So I approached them and they said, "Oh, fantastic, yeah, you can do it well, but 25. I said, "Oh, no, I'm 23. They said, "Yeah, but 25. We don't lend anybody money unless you're 25. I said, "Oh, okay." And I tried, but no, they wouldn't lend me the money. So I said, "Okay, I'll go to England, get to be 25, and have a go at full-time motor racing." And so I wrote to McLaren's. They didn't reply, which I didn't expect. And then I flew off to England.
Well, let's just picture what McLaren were like then. This is beginning of '67, and Bruce he's already raced his Formula One car at Monaco in '66. So the Formula One program is gathering strength. He's got ideas of sports car and Can-Am as well. Losing strength, yes.
Losing strength because the car's not so sweet.
Before we leave New Zealand, though, one question: Bill's funeral.
Yeah.
I believe Jimmy Clark.
Well, my father was a strict kind of Protestant. Didn't want to have any kind of celebration, no religious deal. So we had to hire a funeral car and take the car to my brother's body to Dunedin, which is the nearest crematorium. And my father wasn't telling anybody about this, but the word got out, and several New Zealand racing drivers and people turned up, and Jimmy Clark turned up, which was very nice, because he was a fellow Scot. My father liked him, and they got on well. So that was very nice. That was very nice of him. Yes.
Thanks for that.
So then...
you came to England, the proverbial ship to England?
No, I flew because I couldn't afford to go by ship, because I was smart enough to work out that if you went by ship, you didn't work for 6-8 weeks. Whereas if you flew, I flew on a Friday and started to work on the Tuesday. So I didn't lose much money at all. I didn't have any money, apart from this little legacy, and most of that went on the flight, because flying then was incredibly expensive. It's the kind of same prices as it is now. So it was...
So where did you start work then?
At Colnbrook. I had an aunt who lived in Gerrards Cross. I didn't know where that was. Went there. I said, "I'd like to find McLaren." They said, "Oh, we know where that is. That's in Colnbrook, just down the road." Boom, boom. I had no idea. It could have been hundreds of miles. So on the Monday morning, she took me to McLaren's, and I met Harry Pearce, who was the works manager, and said I wanted a job. He went upstairs, which I now realise he just went up to see Teddy and Bruce, and came back and said, "No, we don't have any jobs for mechanics." And I said, "Well, do you have any jobs at all?" And they said, "Yeah, we need a cleaner." I said, "Boom, boom. I'm a fantastic cleaner," which I am. So on Tuesday, I
told you this guy was passionate.
So on Tuesday, my auntie took me back in her bright yellow Hillman Imp, and I went to work as a cleaner, and I worked all day as a cleaner. But in the lunchtime, I paid interest in the cars and talked to Wally Wilmot, who was one of the mechanics, a Kiwi, Tyler Alexander, who was there, Mike Barney, and maybe even Bruce. I don't remember whether Bruce was there.
Did you know Bruce from New Zealand? Or?
Just to say hello, not to have a conversation with, but not.
But he would have known you were Bill's brother.
Yes, he knew who I was, and I knew who I was, obviously. But we had never had a conversation apart from "Hello, how are you?" kind of thing. And so at the end of the day, I finished my cleaning duties at 5, and then I went over to the mechanics and said, "Can I give you a hand?" And they said, "Oh yeah, can you change the ratios?" I said, "Yeah, sure." I'd never worked in that kind of gearbox before, but the gearbox is a gearbox. So I took it to bits, and I didn't ask them where the ratios were because that would have distracted them. So I searched the building and found they were in the truck. Got the ratios out of the truck, changed the ratios, put them back in the box. And then I said, what else? And this went on all night. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, Tyler said, okay, we're going to go home now. I said, okay, because I hadn't said a word. There was no food, no sustenance, just a coffee machine. 2 o'clock in the morning, we're going to go home. I said, okay, what time do you get in? He said, I usually get in about 7. Okay, I said. So I got my sainted art to drive me there at 6:45. So when he got there at 7 o'clock, I was sitting on the wall outside. So he took me inside, gave me something to do on the racing car. And when Mr. Pierce came to work at 9 o'clock, he said, you need another cleaner. This bloke's a mechanic. So I was a mechanic. I was a cleaner for a day, and the next day I was working. And that was a BRM engine car. It was a little Formula 2 car with a BRM V8 in it.
Which I actually saw in the Alton Park charity meeting and then at the Monaco Grand Prix, 67.
Okay.
Yeah, lovely little car.
And nearly won a race in it.
Well, Monaco, he was running second or third.
Yeah.
When he had a problem, I think.
And then sadly, the next day they took it testing to Goodwood and burnt it out. The battery shorted across the back of the seat back, and it came back a charred wreck. That was the end of that one. But in the corner there was a BRM engine car. I forget what number it was, but it was a car, a curve-shaped car that was going to have a BRM engine, a 3-litre engine. And but I was set to work doing the Can-Am cars, and we spent months building the new Can-Am cars, which just took 7 days a week, 25 hours a day for months. And so that's all I ever did. And my wife hadn't arrived, so I was able to work incredible. I could work more hours than anybody. I outworked Tyler, which took some doing, and because he put the hours in.
Now, is Tyler going to dispute that?
No, probably not. We weren't counting. There was no. It was just loved. The great thing about what I did at McLaren in those days, and in retrospect, at the time I didn't think it, but now I think back, I worked all those hours, 7 days a week. I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning, went home at 2 o'clock in the morning, whatever, and never wanted to get up in the morning and go, oh, I've got to go to work today. Right. Just got up and tore out the door because I had the thing to do,
And that's all you wanted to do?
My job. I loved my job. And there was very little drawn of any of the cars. The drawing of the car was like a child's drawing. It was the monocoque and the engine and the front suspension, the rear suspension. All the rest of it was done by us. Fuel system, oil system, steering, dashboard, instruments. The layout of the car was done by the mechanics. And
what about Bruce? How much influence did Bruce have on all
he had lots.
details?
He worked most days. He would come and join in, and he'd make bits. But mostly, we just have the conference about how we're going to do things. We'd do it like that, or do it like this, and then he'd hobble off, and we'd get on with it. But he was a great bloke to work with. Fantastic. He was a great motivator of people, and a very charming man. Nobody speaks ill of the dead, but Bruce really was a very, very nice man, and a great motivator of people.
And when you think of Bruce now, do you also think of Bruce the racing driver? I mean, how do you perceive him as a racing driver, as distinct from all the other things he was? Bruce in the car, helmet on, as a race driver.
I was his mechanic, for a season, like his chief mechanic. And Bruce, I want to be careful here. Bruce was never going to be world champion unless he had by far the best car. He was not, top draw.
But he knew that
was quick.
as well.
But yes, he was realistic, which is not often with racing drivers. Most of them aren't realistic. But I think Bruce knew that he wasn't going to be, world champion material. He was a good driver and capable of winning races and did. But he wasn't the man with a stroke of genius. He wasn't on pole very often, let's put it that way.
Alastair, your first Grand Prix, I think, was the Italian Grand Prix, 67, this year we've been talking about.
It was.
And it wasn't a straightforward trip down to Monza, right?
No, I'd never been to Europe before. I'd never been to France or Italy, any place. England was my extent of my experience. And the day before the truck had to go, they came and said, or the day, they said, would you like to go to Monza? I said, does Rose Kennedy have a black dress? I'm in. And off you went.
I bet you did say that too, actually.
I did. And tore home, got my passport, climbed in this great. Could I drive the truck? Of course I could. And we went off to Dover. And when we got to Dover, in those days we had an RAC sticker on the truck, and there was a little RAC man in a uniform. and he would salute when you came up. And we saluted and came and checked our paperwork. And he said, "Oh, you don't have the acquis of caution." I said, "What's an acquis of caution?" I had no idea. Mike should know. Mike Barney was with me. He said, "Oh, this is a thing for the spares." He said, "Oh, don't even go. Stay here. Get it tomorrow. Go tomorrow." He said, "Oh, well, we won't make Monza, if we lose a day. Let's go." So we went, and sure enough, got the carnets done. They said, "Where's the acquis?" No acquis. They locked the truck up. 10 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night, they'd locked the truck up and said we had to go to Calais. They wouldn't take us to Calais. Calais' a long way from the port. Yep. So we set off to walk to town, and there was a ping pong tournament going on in a cafe.
Is this true?
This is true. There's a ping pong tournament going on, and all these Frenchmen came out, and I, for the first time in my life, saw 30 people shake hands with 29 people, because they all had to shake hands. This took 5 minutes. And Mike said, "Come on, let's go." I said, no, this guy might have a bed, and they'll save us walking to town. So eventually all this handshaking stopped, and this huge Frenchman with a dirty white apron was there, and I said, "Excuse me, do you have a room?" "Oui." So off we went, slept in this place, god-awful place, got up in the morning, for the first time saw guys with blue overalls on have a coffee and a brandy to start the day. Brandy, coffee and a cognac. That's a French truck driver. Wash. One to get going and one to slow down. And then we went off back to the place. Oh, and the RSC guy who had met us in France the night before, I said, "Well, how about bribing these guys?" He said, "Oh, no, ooh, la, 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 la. Never." He said, "We'll all be in jail. Don't even think about it." I said, "Well, every book I've ever written about France says you can bribe.
Have you read about France?
You can bribe." He said, No. Anyway, so at 6 o'clock in the morning, we went back, and the office was open, but the boss didn't get in until 9 o'clock, and we had to negotiate with him. Basically, had to have the acquis. So Michael went upstairs, because there was no pre-phones, of course, pre-mobiles, upstairs to use the payphone to ring Bruce. This is about 7, so now at 6 o'clock in the morning, Bruce has got a phone call, because France is an hour ahead, as always.
Right.
So Bruce has got this phone call about how he's got to get somebody to go to the RSC, do this, blah, blah. Meanwhile, I'm sitting in the office with 2 young French customs men, and I've got a big black briefcase, which is the company briefcase, and in those days, no credit cards. I knew nothing about French money. I opened this up, and inside there were big envelopes, and one of them had French money in it, one had Italian money in it. So I got the first note out of this envelope, and it was 200 francs. It was a big note, like huge, fantastic, beautiful thing.
I remember them. And
I got another one out, and these young men looked very interested. And I said, "Un pour vous. We get the Grand Clay, and we get the Grand Camion." "Oui," they said. And they had this thing, they'd done it so many times before, they had this practice thing where they folded this note up small enough to go in this little button pocket up here. Young man slid the notes in, did the note up, and we marched, the 3 of us, down the wharf, got the truck out, and poor Mike, and I think back on it, oh dear, I drove the truck down the wharf, and he was still on the phone to Bruce, and I went, doodle-doodle-doodle-doodle-doodle,
we're ready to go.
"Come on, let's go." So he had to say, Alistair's outside with the truck. I don't know how he got it, but off we went. And when we got to out of France, I was ready. I knew, just bribed him to get out without the acquis. And got to Italy, and there was 400 trucks lined up. I can tell this story about going to the Italian Grand Prix. There was 400 trucks lined up. Mike said, "We'd pull in behind them." I said, "Pull in behind them." Never. Drove up to the front, ran the truck out of brakes, managed to knock over the RAC man's kiosk, paid him off.
Now, come on, you're exaggerating.
No. Mike was running alongside the truck, throwing rocks under the back wheel, trying to stop the truck, because the truck didn't have enough, I ran it out of brakes. But we got stopped, because fortunately where the customs was flat. But there was their version of the RAC man, ADAC or whatever, the Italian version, in a little round building with a thatched roof. And I managed to run into this and knock it over. So he was screaming like a stuck pig with all his brochures and stuff. But once again, I was getting used to this. Calmed him down. The police came. We helped pick it up again. I gave him some money. And then there were all these truck drivers queued up at these 2 windows where these guys were doing their paperwork. So I got, I think, 20,000 lira notes. They were even bigger than the French ones. Big as the carnets. Put them in the carnets with the edge sticking out of the carnets, each carnet, and then went and stood by the office, and the guy did another one, and then he said, so over I went, he put them underneath the desk, pulled the notes out, off we went. we were having lunch. We were having lunch at the Hotel de Ville before the end of the day. We got down to Monza, unloaded the cars, and the rest of them who were flying hadn't come. We were in the hotel when they turned up, and I was having this epic meal, my first Italian meal, which I could also take hours to tell about. Just fantastic.
Well, briefly, what was it?
Oh, well, it was just in those days in Italy, you didn't order ahead. It was a game between you and the waiter. They said, okay, antipasta. And they bought a trolley, and this trolley was over a metre long and had 3 layers, and it had food I'd never seen before. And he said, what would you like? And I said, everything. And he said, no, you put 3 or 4. We put it in a plate like this. I said, no, everything. He said, oh, okay. So we went off and got a huge plate, and he gave me everything that was on it. It was stuff I'd never seen before in my life. Mike knew what a lot of it was. So I just inhaled that. Boy, could I eat, and so on. And the meal took 2 or 3 hours, and it was just brilliant.
And when everybody arrived from England, and they said, how was the trip? You just said, oh, it was fine, no problem.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah. I didn't even speak about it.
Very different today, Alastair. EU regulations, restrictions everywhere, laws, bits of paper. You hate it.
Yeah, one of the joys of Monza was for years and years, you were not allowed to drive a truck in Italy on Sunday. And I used to drive the truck. A guy called Alan McCall and I, for years, were the chief mechanic.
We know Alan McCall very well, of course.
And we used to drive the truck. We had a truck driver, poor old Alan, but he was too slow, so he was never allowed to drive the truck. And he used to go the wrong way anyway. So we got in the truck, and on Sunday night, you're not allowed to drive the truck. So we would drive on the road, out of Monza. The truck would always be ready at the end of the race with the back open, and the drivers would literally in the back, because we had to get back to get the cars fixed to get them off to Canada. So we had a very tight time schedule. So we used to drive through the night and get back to England on Monday morning. But we always used to get the start of the Autostrada up to the tunnel, and they'd say, oh, no, you can't, you're not allowed till midnight. No trucks till midnight. Oh, yeah, it's free today. No, you have to park over there with all the other trucks. Wait till midnight. So, okay, thanks very much. Just wait. Year after year. Always waiting for the law to come pursuing us. We never did. We just get the other end, and they'd say, where's your ticket? We said, oh, I blew out the window, whatever. Okay. Pay the maximum, which we were paying anyway. But, yeah, so I had a lot of fun in the truck. Drove the truck for years, because the mechanics drove the truck. Worked all night and then drove the truck.
Again, EU regulations.
No driver's hours and all that stuff. And we drove this thing with no tachograph, flat out, slipping and sliding that beauty over the cobblestones of Europe. We never, ever touched a thing. Yeah. Never once did we touch a single object. And we drove this car. We had a stick to hold the throttle open, and which used to jam under the dashboard and hold it flat for hours, because the old road before the Autobahn, before they built the Autoroute, down from Lyon, was 3 lanes. And there was a suicide lane in the middle. So we just sat in the middle lane with the headlights on, with the stick in. And if something was coming and you reached for it, the passenger would go, yes. That's when I learned to drive with the headlights on. I always, when I rally, I always drive with the headlights on. We always had the headlights on.
Well, we'll get onto your rallying career a little bit later on. Alastair, back at base at that point, what was the delineation like between Formula One and Can-Am? How did it work? Because already in '67, Bruce was very intensively involved with both.
Oh yes, I mean, that's what, as I said, when I arrived, we had this one little thing with this Formula 2 car, that went off, burnt, and then we all switched to the Can-Am car. And Mike Barney, I think, on his own, fiddled with this shaped car, curved sidecar.
The M7C, probably.
No, it was pre-M7. M7 was after, so it would be an M5.
M5A, yeah, that's right.
And it had a chassis that went past the engine and was being built for a V12.
It was a V12 BRM, yeah, I remember.
But that was just coming. It was just coming, and that was being built for Monza. But the real push was to build these Can-Am cars. And so I worked endlessly on these Can-Am cars. And Bruce was there, Tyler, everybody in the company was just flat out building these 2 new cars, and endless hours.
And did you do the Can-Am at that point as well?
Not at all.
Traveling to America?
No. I wasn't a race mechanic. Oh, I was a mechanic, but you follow me. I didn't have a car to work on. Right. Monza was the first trip I went, and there was Mike Barney, and I think Wally Wilmot.
But then when '68 began, were you Formula One?
I was Formula One. '68 began, and I was now working on the M7s, which were being built.
Beautiful Robin Herd cars.
Robin Herd cars with a Ford V8 in them. We had this Ford V8 where we was kowtowing to this engine, and we were building these cars. But Denny turned up, and Denny had to do South Africa.
He was the world champion.
It was the world champion, and he was hired along with Phil Kerr, and he came to drive the car for 68, and the first race in Kyalami there was no M7, so two guys, which was Wally Wilmot and I, were sent. That was the Grand Prix team, and we flew to Johannesburg, and the car had been sent from Durban on a train, on a steam train, and when it got to Johannesburg they just pushed it off the flat deck, broken the nose, broken the radiator mounts, and smashed the water pipes. And this was on Wednesday, and practice was the next day. So we had to clean the car, find water pipes, build water pipes, build a water frame, repair the radiator, repair the bodywork, and get to the racetrack with no transport. You just couldn't make it up. And we did it. Well, and we were there. And then the management arrived, which was Teddy Mayer and his wife, and Denny. That was it. You know, that was the Grand Prix team. And the first practice, it was quite high in Kyalami, and it was hot. It was 100 degrees or whatever. And all the cars were going ba 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 ba. You know, the fuel system getting hot. So, and Wally said to me, "Oh, we need some ducting. You know, we want to duct the metering unit and the fuel pump." So I went and had a look in our hard car, and it had, you know, like half a metre on both sides of the dashboard to the ducts. So I pulled them out, whoosh, took them back. And he said, "We're going to need more than that." And I said, all the other teams had the same hire cars. And none of them were locked, so I just went down the whole back of the pits.
No.
Came back. Yeah, if you look at pictures of the car, it's got ducts. It's got six, it's got three on either side of the roll bar, which are going down to cool the fuel collector pot, the fuel pump, and the metering unit. And they were all made out of the ducts, out of the other. And when they saw what we had, they all went trotting off to get there. And oops, gone. Yeah, so we finished I think we finished third or fourth. Anyway, we got championship points.
And you were there on Bruce's car when he won his team's first Grand Prix at Spa.
Yes, so that was my car. By that stage, I was now his chief mechanic. I had a guy working with me, and Jim Murdoch, who's coming to the 50th dinner at Goodwood. And Jim Murdoch and I worked on this car. And there's a nice little tale there, because Bruce turned up, because they were like visitors now. They were doing their Can-Am and their Indy, and they just turn up just before the race, jet-lagged, get in the car, complain about having no horsepower, and do the race, and then disappear again. and so we were very much in control of our destiny, because Bruce was just a visitor. He didn't have much input from him, because he just went straight back to the States. He turned up with two pairs of drive shafts, which were different drive shafts, a lot lighter, with these horrible BRD English-made drive shafts, which weighed a ton and were unreliable as well. And he turned up with these pot joints, which was a single pin plunging and turning drive shafts, to put these on the car. So we said, okay, so we put them on the car and we practiced. In those days, by the way, we used to do half a lap. We used to drive them up from the garage at Stalvelo up to the start finish, and at the end of the practice we used to drive them back to the garage again. So we used to get a lap a day.
You used to drive them?
Yeah, we used to drive them. Mechanics used to drive them. And on the way home, because it was hot, we used to get pretty quick. Down the Master Straight, which was the old-fashioned straight, which had a railway line and a kink in it. Woo! Hair in the wind, very good. And this is good. Then we do 9,000, and then we get the gear ratio chart. So that was 154 miles an hour or something. And the next day we do 9.5.
Now you're exaggerating now, Alastair.
No.
And who was in the other car? Who was in Denny's car?
Alan McCall. So we used to have a lot of fun.
Two Kiwis.
So we have a lot of fun driving these cars backwards and forwards. Anyway, we went down to Stalvelo with a little dirt Ford agency where we worked on a dirt floor in the garage. And little Al didn't have much to do. I had an engine change, I think, and he decided to take his drive shafts off and have a look at them, these new drive shafts. And he took one apart, and it had some galling. It had been rubbed, touching up, just a little bit of friction in it. And he said, "Oh, I can stone this off. I can fix this up, and it'll be fine." And I said, "No." So I said to him, we took ours off, and we put the horrible BRD drive shafts back on. And it's the only time I ever fell out with Bruce. I drove my car back to the pits. Bruce turned up at whatever time he did. I don't think we had a warm-up in those days. It was pre-warm-up days. And he saw straight away that his car had the BRD drive shafts on. He said, "What's happened here?" And I said, "Well, little Al took his off last night, and they had a bit of galling, so I decided to put these back on, because we know these will finish." He said, they were called hooks joints, "Put them back on." I said, "Oh, there's not enough time." He said, "There's plenty of time." I said, "There's plenty of time, but something might go wrong. Might cross-thread a bolt, or something will go wrong with drop. It's not the right time to do it." and he was angry. Very, very rarely would Bruce get angry. He told me directly to put them on, and I'd refused. So he stumped off, literally. And everybody went, ooh, you're in trouble, because he never lost his temper. He always used persuasion.
And Bruce had a slight limp, we got to add here, from Perthes disease. Right?
Yes, when he was a boy, so he had one short leg. So he did rock and roll. When he walked, he walked along a bit. So he stamped off, but he wasn't very good at stamping. He didn't do angry very well. Anyway, off he went. And we started the race, and he was running 5th or 6th, you could look it up, 7th or something like that. And Denny was running 3rd, and then 2nd, and then eventually 1st, past somebody like Stewart or whatever, to take the lead in a McLaren. Looking good, we're sweet babies. We've added a fuel tank, which we've made the night before, which you can see held on by hose clips because the car didn't hold enough fuel. People used to run out of fuel all the time at Spa because they didn't build their cars big enough fuel. And we had the same thing. Herd had designed it with a 25-gallon tank or whatever, and there wasn't enough. So we made a 4-gallon tank over the night and bolted it on the side of the car, and with a little pump to pump it in, which we had to borrow from Brabham's because we didn't carry. Anyway, I could tell stories forever. So we're in the race, and Denny's leading the race, and the next thing we know, he's in the pits. What is it? Drive shaft. It's melted. It's melted. We tried to get it off, because in those days, so few people, it was like Monaco, so few people finished Spa because they used to run out of fuel, that we tried to change the drive shaft. We tried to chisel it off the side of the car, but we couldn't get it off. So in the end, he retired. Meanwhile, Bruce was 5th, and then I think with 2 laps to go, he was 3rd, and then the car ran out of gas or something and stopped or whatever.
Won the race.
McLaren, in a McLaren, and it was my car. And it's great because he came around, stood up in the seat, said, "Oh, fantastic." I said, "Oh yeah, blah, blah, blah." And he said, "What happened to Denny?" And I was able to say, "Drive shaft." And they never mentioned it again.
I was going to say,
it was never spoken about ever again. But Bruce never questioned again my judgment. If I said, "We won't put that on the car," he didn't go, "Oh, we should." I said, "Okay," because I established that day, because it's a kind of standard deal, that if you want to win the World Championship, you don't change your car. Reliability is the number one thing above all else. And in those days, cars weren't so reliable. They're very reliable now because they spend a fortune on lifing the components and blah. But in our day, the lifing was me. I decided when to change the drive shafts, when to change the uprights, all this stuff, to try and keep the car reliable. There was no computer program. There was one person who did it, which was me. And so, as I say, this drive shaft decision was a very good decision. And Bruce won his first race, and it definitely gave him some more confidence in my abilities.
Alastair, what was it like the day you lost Bruce?
Well, it was horrific. I was there, and
you were at Goodwood?
Oh yeah, Jimmy Stone and I took him out of the car. Jimmy Stone and I put the fire out with a handheld fire extinguisher. I lifted him out of the car and held him until the ambulance came. And
there was was he killed instantly? Or?
Yeah, yes. He hit, they had these Marshall stands, which were like butts at shooting. There were half circles of dirt, about A high. So the marshals could stand behind them. But of course they were like concrete, they were solid, they were been there for years and years. And the body hadn't been put on properly. And the body of the Can-Am car popped up and just lifted the back of the car up, which we saw. You read that people say, "No, we saw it. We saw the accident." We didn't see the hit because that was below our sight line. But we saw the body pop up. And he was a passenger, just lifted the back of the car off the ground. It turned around and it backed into this thing at 160 miles an hour, something like that. Huge speed. Car was very quick on the straight. Woof, and came to a stop in 2 or 3 feet. So he was just smashed. He was smashed. He was burnt slightly, but that's not, a bit like Nicky. His face was burnt because the visor was open, but that wasn't what killed him. What killed him was just the sheer impact.
And when you say the body was not on properly, was that an aerodynamic thing? Or?
No, it wasn't put on properly.
And
there was a human error.
Right.
Let's put it down to human error.
Which happens, and Bruce knew that, and he knew the risk.
Yeah,
we all
these things happen.
Well, at that moment, let's pause for a second, because racing goes on, life goes on, and this weekend, past a a driver who's been around for a little bit now. He was racing in Europe in Formula 3, but he went back to America. He's the son of an American dad who actually was a McLaren engineer for a while, working with John Barnard. The father is called Gordon Kimball. His son, Charlie, won the IndyCar race at Mid-Ohio at the last weekend, and we chatted with Charlie about that great occasion. Very sincere congratulations on what was just, no doubt, a brilliant weekend for you. And that three-stop strategy, a race with, I don't think any safety cars, any pace cars, right? It was just a green flag race the whole way, a real race.
Yep, it was 90 laps of green flag racing around Mid-Ohio, which it was neat because they made the strategy call early enough to commit to it, but we still had to have the pace in the car to make it work. And the guys had worked so hard on Saturday after my practice crash to give me a car for qualifying that could put it up front. So starting fifth, we knew we had the speed if we could get in clean air and run competitive lap times to have a shot and build a gap and get up front and stay up front.
Charlie, after all the hard work and thinking back now to all your time in Formula 3 in Europe and how hard you've worked to get to where you are, what a nice thing to have this first win on a circuit like Mid-Ohio.
It's incredible. I mean, it's a track that I've always enjoyed watching racing at, and even when I was racing F2000 before going over to Europe, it was fantastic to compete there and to get my first IndyCar win. Now, I remember when we raced F2000, after our race, I'd go up in the stands and watch the IndyCar races. And so to be able to get my first IndyCar Series win there and do it with such a team like Chip Ganassi Racing behind me is, I mean, you only get your first IndyCar win once. And yeah, it's very, very special. And I think it's still sinking in a little bit, but it's been really neat.
Charlie, how your dad, was he there?
He didn't make it, but with the summer break in Formula One, my sister was home from England with my parents in California, and so they were all watching it together, and I got the chance to talk to them just after the race, and so they were there in spirit, that's for sure. Well,
tell me, did your dad's voice intonation go up at all, or did he just remain his usual calm, phlegmatic self?
There was definitely some enthusiasm and excitement in his voice. Now, I think maybe I'm able to hear it because I've been listening to him for 28 years, but I think most people would say the intonation was very similar, but I could hear the pride and excitement in all of their voices, you know, my whole family and everybody who's been a part of it. You know, everyone from Novo Nordisk has been so supportive. You know, the last couple of days reaching out and congratulating me, and you know, it's as much a win for them and the diabetes community as it is for myself.
Well, I'm sure it is, and I can just imagine how much your dad is enjoying every moment of this. He knows how hard it is to make it in racing. He knows how hard your struggle has been, and to have this win, just brilliant. It's a good year in many ways for IndyCar. Lots of new names like yours. Taku Sato is another good example. Mike Conway stepping back in, and we saw Luca Filippi now having his debut. There's certainly a change taking place. Dare I say the old guard perhaps need to be looking over their shoulder a bit more?
Well, I think it's really an indication of how competitive the championship is at the minute. That we've had 9 different winners this year in, I think, 14 races. And so, you know, 9 winners in 14 races is quite a lot. And that's an indication that there are, I believe, 12 or 15 drivers that are capable of winning a race each week. I mean, Will Power hasn't won a race this year. Dario Franchitti hasn't won a race this year. And you know, you look at those names not being on the winner's roll, and pretty soon you're at, you know, because we all know they're capable, so there's at least 11 drivers capable of winning. And that's a pretty deep field. And so I think that competitiveness and the parity amongst the cars, you know, and the engine manufacturers, even with Honda and Chevy going head to head, the parity is very, very close. So you end up with the opportunity for first time winners, and you end up with the chance that as a driver and as a team, if you get it a little bit wrong, you end up way wrong because it's so competitive. But when you get it right, you can make yourself look really good.
Charlie, as somebody who, and this is my final question, but as somebody who came over to Europe and did well and tried to crack it and worked hard, but in the end went back to America and now you're right there in IndyCar, what do you think about the difficulty now for younger drivers trying to get into Formula One, how expensive it's become? You have the road to Indy there. It's a very confused road to Formula One in Europe now. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the IndyCar series has done a really good job, especially after their political challenges a few years ago, to get the reunification and to build what I think is a really strong ladder system, and a ladder system that's brought, really good drivers up through the ranks. Myself, James Hinchcliffe, J.R. Hildebrand, Tristan Vautier, Joseph Newgarden, all of these drivers have come through that ladder system and are successful. So as a team owner in the IndyCar series, they can look and say, okay, the driver's done this, this, and this, and we know that if they're successful in the Indy Lights, they can get in an IndyCar and be fast. So that adds a lot of confidence to young karters who want to map their business plan and map their road to being an IndyCar driver, being a professional road racer. Where in Europe, I originally went to Europe because there was that confusion in the ladder system here in the U.S. There was the split between Atlantics and Indy Lights. There was the split between kart and Indy. And so you didn't know what the right opportunity was. And with those splits, a lot of the budgets were too expensive. And I don't know if history is repeating itself in Europe or if it's just beginning to figure itself out. But having that clear-cut road makes it so much easier for young drivers, but also for team owners and for guys like myself to look and see who the next generation is going to be and who I need to be looking out for.
Well, Charlie, you've certainly done a great job, and congratulations again. We have on the show this week Alastair Caldwell. He's not a contemporary of your dad's, but another top McLaren man, and we're celebrating soon 50 years of the formation of the McLaren Formula One team. So with your dad's links with the McLaren team, a timely win for you, I would say.
Absolutely. It's definitely neat. And for me, growing up, always seeing Formula One parts and designs and watching the races to get a glimpse of my dad in the pit lane is some of my more special memories of motorsports as a young boy. And to be able to get some success myself as a driver, I think it still pales in comparison to his two Indy 500 wins and multiple Grand Prix wins and World Championships. So it's I've still got a long road to hoe to catch up with his legacy in racing.
But you're doing very well, and congratulations again, Charlie. Thanks for talking to us, and all the best.
Thank you very much.
Young Charlie Kimball, good to see him winning races. Al, I noticed, I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but a couple of times you've referred to it as my car. And I know that within the world of mechanics, the Frank Williams of this world love to say, it's not your car, it's our car, it's the team's car. Yeah. But you do refer to it as my car quite in quite a relaxed way.
Yes, I did. In those days, I was in such control of the Grand Prix team for a while, like 74, 75, 76, for 3 or 4 years there. I was in total control of it. And I thought they were my cars. The only person who used to pull me up would be Gordon Coppock, because he designed them and he put a lot of input, and he would say, Alastair, they're our cars. Oh, sorry, Gordon. Yeah, they're our cars. So I'd switch to ours for a while, and then after a while I'd split to my cars, because I had a huge influence in the running of the team and the building of the cars and even the design of the cars. The drawings would come down, and if I didn't see them, the fabricators would come and say, oh, this looks a bit dodgy, that's a bit... Shouldn't we have a bigger radius there or something, or shouldn't we make that out of 18 gauge? And I'd say, oh, probably, yeah, make it out of 18 gauge. And then I would go upstairs and say, oh, by the way, that fillet in the front wishbone, we're making that out of 18 gauge, not 20 gauge. So could you mark up the drawing? And they didn't say, uh-oh, you can't do that. They just said, yes, okay. Alastair. So,
which in many ways is how a Grand Prix team should be run, isn't it? One guy. I mean, look at the successful teams even to now with Adrian Newey. You would imagine it is one guy.
pretty much the same.
And committees don't really work in Formula
They're not
One.
fast enough. They're not fast enough. Basically, obviously on race day, when it starts to rain or the pace car goes out, somebody's got to go do that.
Yeah.
You can't have all these tosses with the 200 things putting all their inputs in. It's not going to work. Somebody has to go do it. And
but there are lots of people out there who need to do the work because they're employed to do it.
yeah. Well, Adrian Newey, I know Adrian. I don't meet him socially, but I do know him, and I love the fact that he still uses an analog drawing board, and he's still in charge of the thing. And he's more of an old style, and it's working well.
Alastair, apart from the 50th anniversary of the forming of McLaren as a company, this is also a big year for the whole James Hunt, Niki Lauda thing around the back of Rush. Now, the 76 we've talked a lot, and you did a great job in that BBC documentary, I've got to say, and we'll be talking more about that in the next couple of weeks. But I'm interested to know, just going a little bit further in detail there, thinking about 76, nobody actually cheated at all, did they, that year?
It depends what you call cheating. It's not cheating until you get caught. That's the number one principle.
Well, let's talk about tyres in 76, because there was a bit of a restriction on qualifying tyres.
Yes, there was a restriction on qualifying tyres that you're only allowed, I think, 3 sets, if I remember rightly, or 2 sets. I can't. It's 3 or 2. And what they did is they came around with radioactive paint and marked the isotope paint so they could trace it with a Geiger counter, and they would have a different shape, like a bunny or a flower or tree or whatever. And I had a very good sign writer painter, Lance Gibbs, and the entertainment officer who's called as well, because he provided a lot of entertainment. So he was geared up, and we would mount 4 sets of the qualifiers, and they would come and mark the first set, and you were allowed to bowl them straight away, because people did. It was a big panic to get them ready. So as soon as they marked the first one, we didn't bowl it towards the racing cars, we bowled it inside the truck, and he had a look, and had a little thing, and he cut out a right shape, and he had all the paints he needed in the world. He mixed up the right colour, and we'd have 4 more tyres mounted with the right logo on them and the right thing, and then we'd out into the pit road. And practice would start, and I think you're allowed to go out in an old set, and run an old set to get the car, get the driver orientated, and then bang on this new set. And Ferrari's actually had a man whose job it was to count the tyres as they went past. And they had labels on them. We used to call it the white labels. They used to go waff, 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 waff by with the labels. And this guy, 1 set, James Hunt, qualified, pull in, another set, mark it, 3rd set, 4th set, and they'd come thundering up the pit road, the FIA, the Scudeniers, Ferrari with their 2 lawyers, the Geiger counter, everything. James would pull in, stop, take the tyres off. Is it good? They say you used 4 sets. No, you must be mad, this guy's hallucinating. Because by this stage, the original set was stripped off, the little signs were roughed off them, Goodyears had no idea. And so on. And then we had to use the same qualifying tyre, and you weren't allowed to, there was the same compound for everybody. So I used to get Goodyears to mount me a new set, and they'd say, oh, well, you shouldn't really have a new set because it's best to have the tyres new for the race. Oh, yeah, but we want to do the setup back at the factory on actual tyres, the actual tyres we're going to qualify on the race tyre. So it mounted as a set, and we took them back to Colnbrook, and I had a lock-up, which I paid for, nobody else knew about, and we wrapped them in this tyre softener, which we got from America, and left them for a week with a tyre softener on, took them out, cleaned them up, popped them in the truck, and that would be the 2nd or the 3rd set. It was just slightly softer.
We used to joke about, who runs the cheating department in this team, who runs the cheating department in that team. And I remember talking to James once about qualifying. I think it was 76, and I was saying, you're doing an amazing job in qualifying, James. You really... The pole lap is something you're really doing well now. And he was a very, very fast racing driver.
He was quick.
And I remember him saying, I'll tell you all about that one day. Here we are. No, it wasn't all that.
No. But I have to interrupt here and say, James never knew this at the time. Later on, maybe years later. But at the time, nobody, including Teddy, because Teddy had a mouth.
Teddy didn't know?
No, because Teddy would tell the whole world. He would have told Bernie, "Oh boy, we got this scheme going." You couldn't tell Teddy anything that would advantage other teams if you could avoid it, because he went out in the evening and it had to tell people how great he was. And one of the things he would have told them how good he was at doing everything. So, no, there's very few people at the time knew.
Well,
this.
what happened with the fuel at Monza in '76?
Well, the fuel things are quite. The fuel, to try and rush it along, in Austria, the engines used to blow up engines. So eventually, I took a fuel sample back from Austria to Texaco's, who are our main sponsor, but didn't provide the fuel. We used to just buy the 5-star wherever we were, because the logistics of carrying fuel across borders was a pain. You've got to remember, it was pre-EU, so if you carried 400 litres or 600 or 1,000 litres of fuel across the border, huge hoo-ha, be there the rest of your life. So we used to just buy the 5-star in Austria or Italy or England, wherever we were, because it was meant to be 101 octane, and that was the rules. But the rules were 101 octane plus or minus 1%, quite clearly, plus or minus 1%. So in simple terms, 101 is 102. It's actually 102.1 because you got the extra. But just say 1% of 101 is 1% plus a little bit. So 102 was the maximum.
Yeah.
I took this fuel back to Texaco from Austria and said, "What do you think of this?" And they analysed it and said, "This is rubbish." So what do you mean? They said, "Well, it meets the 101 octane, but the motor number is hopeless." So what's that? I had no idea. Turns out fuel's got two measurements. It's got research, which is the one you see on the pumps, and it's got motor, which is one that was invented by Daimler-Benz with a variable compression cylinder head on his engine. And that's the good one, because that's when it knocks. Knock.
Right.
So you can have 101 and 80 or 101 and 90. And 101 and 90 is way better, way better. So I said, "What do we normally get?" They said, "Can you build better fuel?" They said, "Yeah, we can build fuel better with a better motor number." So there was a high-level discussion between Texaco and McLaren, because this was going to cost a lot of money, nearly as much as the sponsorship, they claimed, because they were going to have to stop a refinery in Belgium, fiddle with the taps, start it up again, fiddle with it, get it to run, make this fuel, and then stop it and start it again. This was going to cost millions of dollars, they said. But they wanted to do it, you could see it. The fuel men wanted to do it. So in the end, they did. And they made some fuel, which was 101.8, which was legal, and 95 motor number. So this was a far better fuel. And we were able to build engines with a higher compression ratio without them detonating and breaking. So in '76, our engines were a little bit stronger than some other people's. And Ferraris somehow got a tinge of this. Probably Teddy would have said to somebody, "Oh yeah, we're running really good fuel," because that's what he would have done. And so the message got through. So at Monza, there was a great show of them taking fuel out of everybody's cars and taking it off to measure it. And because we were so acutely conscious of this, we used to ask Texaco, and Texaco used to test the fuel before every race, not once a year, but they would take the fuel we were taking to Monza, put it in the machine, say, "Yes, it's still 101.8, still legal." Right. So I checked with a guy called Goossens. I said, "Is the fuel good?" He said, "Yeah, it's fine." So
Big guy, John Goossens.
Yeah,
nice guy.
And he was the Texaco man, liaison between us and Texaco. And I very unusually went home with the mechanics, with the drivers on Saturday night, which I never used to do. But everything was going so sweetly. I went home with the drivers and came to work with the drivers, which I never used to do, at 10 o'clock. And at the gates of the paddock was Piccinini, who was the Ferrari lawyer, and another Ferrari lawyer, and the police. And we thought, what was that about? And we went through the gate. I was immediately arrested and put in jail. They have a jail at Monza, or did in those days. So, proper jail with bars. And
Joking.
Yeah.
Where was it?
Oh, it was over to the right of the gate somewhere. So I got taken away, and Teddy couldn't spend any time because they were going to work. So they went to work, and Piccinini, who spoke perfect English, and nobody would speak any English at all. Why I was in jail? Nobody would tell me. Then a sympathetic Italian journalist said, "Oh, we found out. It's because they say that you've imported the fuel illegally, and you've smuggled the fuel into Italy." And I said, "Oh, and it comes in a Texaco truck," which it did, a little truck driven by a little Texaco man with all the paperwork, so I wouldn't have to hassle it. So we had to find him, and he didn't come to the races, so we had to send him to the hotel to get him out of bed or whatever, bring him to the racetrack with the paperwork, show it to them. So, okay, the fuel's imported legally, let me out of jail. And by this time, they'd had the stewards meeting, called Teddy up and said, your fuel's illegal because it's 101.8 and you're out of the race. Well, you're not out of the race, but your practice times don't count because you used illegal fuel. So you have to drain your cars and in front of witnesses, fill them up with the petrol at the petrol station and start at the back of the grid.
And as good a lawyer as Teddy was, there's nothing he could do about it.
He didn't pick it up, whatever. I wasn't there, I was in jail. But there was no way the car was illegal. Absolutely no way. And I went up, of course, immediately and they said, oh yes, we've realised now, we've read the plus or minus one. It's all set up by Ferraris, the whole thing. We've read it now, so we're going to apologise to Texaco on Monday morning. But you can't do anything about it because the stewards, you can't appeal, you see. You've got to go to the FIA to appeal. Boom, boom, stitched up, perfect. And then James managed to fall out with Price, trying to get up through the field, and got knocked off the road. And that was the end of that. Joachim was so incensed.
Joachim Mass, the other driver.
Yeah, he was given carte blanche to jump the start. And if you look at the video,
carte blanche by you?
By me, yeah. I said you can jump the start. We don't care if you get disqualified. And if you can get up there and tip into those beauties on the first couple of laps. So he tries. But as you look at the video,
that's not ethical, Alastair.
Ferrari's won the world championship with Surtees by sending Bandini up to knock Hill off the road.
64. You really think that's the case?
They stopped the car, had a little chat with him, sent him out. He went round to the hairpin and torpedoed Hill. That was a coincidence. People are all, what's his name? Senna and Prost did it twice, run into each other, consecutive years. Boom, because the world championship was going to be decided at the last race. Yes?
Yeah.
Schumacher and Hill.
Yeah.
Plenty of people run into each other, people in Grand Prix racing, and I said, you jump the start. But sadly, he's so enthusiastic. If you look at the video, he's fourth, I think, or fifth on the first lap from the back row of the grid. But he managed to bend a valve, and he goes by in third or fourth place with the engine going. So he didn't make it. The plan was he would get up to the slow corner and just stumble over the two Ferraris, or one of them at least.
Just do a little snapshot of McLaren 76, winning that world championship. How many people working in the company? You're also racing in other categories. What was it like there?
Well, it was, of course, a tiny team compared with what, I don't actually know the numbers in 76, but it was probably about 50 people total, and that was running Indy cars, Formula 1 cars, Formula 2 car, and so on. So it was way, the team was far. We were getting really big at racetracks. We had two people per car and a spare man. We had a truck man, which we never had before. So we had 7 people for the 3 cars. Now they have 70, whatever, for the pit stops.
But you're not sitting here saying they should be doing it with fewer people and we worked harder then. Obviously times are different now, but what do you think about current Formula 1 teams employing the numbers of people they do and spending the money they do?
I just don't see the reason. I can't. It's difficult for me to understand how they could have that many people to do such a simple job. They're just building 2 cars. They race 2 cars. They don't build them all. They buy in half the bits. People make all the carbon stuff outside and so on, and they assemble this car. Now, how they can need 800 people to do this when the car is so simple, doesn't have any suspension. It's just like a big overpowered go-kart bouncing down the road. There's hardly any technical in it at all, except the aerodynamics. It's all in the aerodynamics. It's nothing to do with mechanical as far as I can make out. The car's got very limited amount of suspension. The engine's, I think, bought in. So all they're doing is trying to get the aerodynamics right. And obviously it's difficult because only 2 or 3 teams can get it right. And that's integrated with the ride height and the shape underneath the car. And just like in our day, you can't understand why you need 800 people because you only need 50 people to copy what the fastest car's doing, which is what they do anyway.
It's true.
I mean, McLarens are looking up at the Red Bull, and they're looking at the Mercedes all the time. They've got people trained to do it. And these days, with all this kind of non-contact technology, I can't imagine that they aren't scanning the underneath the car. I would be. I'd have some little things buried in the racetrack, so when it goes over the top, it goes, that's the shape, there it is, boys. Let's go home. Let's make one like that. I can't imagine they're not doing that.
Alastair, it's no surprise that with a brain like yours, you're not still in Formula 1, living your entire life in this sport, that you went on to do other things. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about those because it's interesting. Not too many mechanics, and you were much more of a mechanic, obviously. You became a team manager and a very successful one by the end. But not too many racing people, Jody Scheckter's one, make a complete break and do what you did. But you decided that it'd be quite good to make some money, and you went out into industry and you made money, right?
Yes, I worked for eccentric millionaires. I worked for Teddy, and then I worked for Bernie, and I thought, well, I'm never going to be an eccentric millionaire working for these guys. There's only old team owners, no old team managers. And so I have to be a team owner, and I thought about that long and hard. But then if you become a racing car team owner, then you become a beggar. You have to spend the rest of your life worrying about where you're going to get the money from, and you have to beg for the money. Nobody comes up and rings up and says, oh, Mr. Caldwell, here's £50 million to run your race team next year. They don't do that. You have to go and ring them up and ask them and go and take them out to dinner and look after them. So you've got this horrible business going on all the time where you're worried about where the money's going to come from in the future. You've got your 800 people, how are you going to feed them? So I thought, well, I won't have anything to do with motor racing because I don't want to have this problem. I love the cars, I love the technical challenge of it. They're beautifully made, lovely things. And I wouldn't mind getting involved in that, but the traveling is rubbish. Staying in the best of hotels is still rubbish, and the business of having to beg for the money and so on. So I thought, motor racing's out, I'll do something else. So I picked on this self-storage business. I have a self-storage business, space station, which is in West London. I've got 5 sites, Slough and Heathrow and
the beauty of that is that you're combining property growth, capital growth in property with income. Something that's paying for itself?
With income, yes. Yeah. I get a good income. I own the buildings. I have a really nice time. I haven't worked for 20 years. I decided to work for 10 years. From 40 to 50, I worked just as hard as... I figured if I worked just as hard as I did in motor racing, I would make some money. So I did. I worked 7 days a week, did it all myself, never trusted anybody to do anything except myself. And eventually, it all worked very well. In fact, very quickly it worked. And so now, as I say, I haven't worked for 20 years.
And then you're in the very nice position of deciding what you're going to do with some of this money and time that you had, and you've made almost a third career of historic car rallying.
Yes, I bought some cars because I like cars, obviously, and I bought myself a Ferrari and an Aston Martin and a big Mercedes, and I put them in a row in a big garage like people do and polished them and cleaned them out, but didn't use them at all. Picnics and weddings or whatever, that was it. But I just wanted to have them as possessions. And then I met a guy socially, a guy called Roger Eland, who lived in Maidenhead, and he raced and rallied. And he said, oh, you must rally. Kept on nagging. So eventually I entered a thing called the Marathon back in '92. And it turned out to be an international rally, and you had to have an international license. And that meant you had to do 4 rallies beforehand, and one of them had to be a stage rally. So, oh, God. So I had somebody prepare a car, and they charged me a fortune, and it wasn't very good. So I thought, oh, maybe I should get some spanners and have a bit of go at spannering. So I got myself a lift and put it in my garage at home and started to prepare my car myself. And I would ring up the office and say, I'm going on Monday. My daughter ran me the business for me. I'd say, I won't be in on Monday.
Amanda, right?
No, Ruth and then Elizabeth.
Right. I remember giving her quite a lot of money at one point, with the one at Heathrow.
And I said, won't be on Tuesday, and eventually I used to go in on Thursdays and then Fridays only and just sign the checks and talk and then eventually she said, Dad, why do you come in at all? You just make the place noisy and smelly and cause trouble. So I said, okay, all right. So I stopped going in at all, and I did this rallying, and the first one I did was up in Scotland, and I had such a good laugh. I was in my wife's 280 SL, which was totally unsuitable, and most of the people were terribly earnest, trying to do this really, really well. I had no idea what to do. I just took the mickey really, and I finished third. It was my best finish for years, and I had such a good time because the other competitors were so funny or interesting. I shouldn't say funny, interesting. I had a nice time, and I've been doing it ever since. And now I kind of specialize a bit in long distance ones, and I travel all over the world. I've been right across China, right across Russia, done the Peking, Paris, Mongolia, all the stands.
Stands.
I've got a Rolls Royce, an old Rolls Royce, 1963 Rolls Royce, and I've driven that hundreds of thousands of miles. It's been to Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, India, Pakistan, Baluchistan, Tibet, Nepal, every place. Russia, all over Europe.
And those hands that have worked on McLarens and Brabhams and who knows what keep these cars running.
Yeah, but I don't do it that much anymore. I have a full-time mechanic now, and Joe, who works at the bottom of my garden. So in the morning I was able to go down, take him a cup of coffee, talk to him about what we're going to do. Sometimes I work on the car, but not very much.
And you got a very good co-driver too, I hear.
Yes. Yeah.
Female.
Yes, yeah, I do.
She's getting on a bit.
Oh yes. My mother. Last year I did a rally, which was started in New York and went up to Anchorage in Alaska. And I rang up my 94-year-old mother, who lives in New Zealand, and asked her if she'd like to do it. Yes, she would, as I knew she would. And so off we went, and we did this 8,000 miles in this Rolls Royce. We won our class.
And you're travelling quite quickly on
occasion.
Oh,
yeah, dirt roads. And it's good fun again. You see, it's an unsuitable car. All the other competitors have got roll cages and knobbly tyres and mud flaps and bandanas and daggers in their mouths. and Mum and I in the Rolls Royce, still the cloud, looking good, beating most of them. And then to top that off, I said to her, we might as well drive home again. So we did, and we drove back. We went to Inuvik, as far north as you can drive in the world, up above the Arctic Circle, down again, and because the road was blocked south, down to the States, across the States, back into Canada, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, East Coast, back to New York, and shipped the car home, 18,000 miles, and she loved every minute of it, 2 months of it.
And you got a trophy, I think, did you not?
Yeah. We won our class, but she also got Spirit of the Rally Award and a standing ovation.
Brilliant. Yeah. Which kind of brings us back to your early days in New Zealand and the two Kimball boys, and your mum, obviously then a player. She came to the races. Sadly, she wasn't in Invercargill. She was at home because my wife had just had a baby. So she was home looking after the baby, and sadly my father wouldn't let her come to the funeral or the cremation. Right. So she didn't get much closure there, but she's got over that. She's still Maud's my brother, obviously. I bet.
But she's a fine lady.
We get a lot of queries on this show and through the magazine as well, from young people wanting to know how to get into Formula One, regardless of their discipline, whether it's as a photographer, mechanic, engineer. How do you get into this sport called Formula One? Well, I think we got the answer today from Alastair Caldwell. You just work hard, and you do it in a way where it never seems like work. Is that a fair comment, Alastair? When you were starting off, you never really felt as if you were going to work, as you said. It was a fantastic time to be involved, and McLaren's was a fantastic team to be involved in. If you'd been in Lotus, there would have drawings would have been coming down. You would have been doing the drawings. You wouldn't have been able to change them or have any input at all. The only person that was going to do that was Chapman. Whereas we were a democracy. We all stayed in the same hotel, apart from anything else, which the other teams didn't. We all stayed in a posh hotel. McLaren's was a democracy. We were New Zealanders. Bruce didn't think he was any better than us. We're all equals, and we had huge input into the running of the cars, the building of the cars. It's a fantastic game. I mean, it's hunting. The number one requirement, that men are meant to do is go out hunting. That's what they're meant to do. The women are meant to stay home and dig with sticks and wait for them to come home with a mastodon or whatever. And motor racing's like that. And you couldn't think of the army uses 20 people, I think, in a platoon. You have 11 people or 14 people in a football team. This is not a mistake. This is about the right size unit where everybody can meld together. You get it bigger than that, and they can't all relate. That's why, what are the 80 people doing? They must have their memos flying. They're all trying to tell each other what the 800 are doing. Whereas when you've only got the 20 or the 14, then everybody knows exactly what. So we only had like 7 or 8. So this is a fantastic hunting pack. And you go out to the Grand Prix, which is the hunt, and then you have the race, and you win. Woohoo! And even if you don't do well, you still say, next week, a fortnight from now, we can try again. So it's for boys, it's got to be the ultimate game. Alastair, privilege as ever. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your brain and your thoughts and your love of motorsport. Wonderful. Alastair will be back with us on August 29 when we go live with The Racer's Edge. He'll be on the panel for the question and answer we have before the premiere of the Rush movie. We won't be showing The Racer's Edge next week. It is the August break, so we're actually going to take 1 week off. We'll be back again the Thursday after that with Richard Wiseman, one of our guests. He's the video archivist we saw on the BBC documentary Hunt versus Lauda. Lots to talk about there in terms of other video that's out there in cyberspace, waiting to be watched by Formula One fans around the world. My thanks to Charlie Kimball, congratulations to him again, and to Alastair Caldwell for spending time with us. Alastair, a great insight into the early days of McLaren. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.